Joan of Arc became my heroine, and I longed for an opportunity to become another such as she.
When her husband joined, Loretta Janetta Velasquez, a Cuban immigrant, wished to join as well, but he wouldn't allow it, sending her off to New Orleans. There, she remade herself into Harry T. Buford and raised a regiment herself. Presented the Arkansas Grays to her husband, he was shocked and sent her away. Not long after this, he was killed in a training accident. Unflinching, Loretta helped raise more recruits and joined as an independent officer, not formally attached to any regiment. She saw her first action at Blackbird's Ford on July 18th. In the opposing army was another woman in disguise, known only to her comrades as Albert Cashier. When the company commander was killed, Loretta took command and helped stave off the Union advance. A few days later, Lieutenant Harry T. Buford was present at the first major engagement of the war. Loretta believed she deserved recognition for her efforts, so she sought a promotion from General Stonewall Jackson. He recommended her for a recruiting commission.
His permission or his aid to do recruiting duty, and determined to wait and see if something better would not offer.
A kind of shiver ran through the huddled mass upon the brow of the cliff. It gave way, rushed a few steps, then in one wild, panic-stricken herd, rolled, leapt, tumbled over the precipice.
High atop Ball's Bluff, a Union force found itself cut off from Washington when Velasquez's Confederate force hit it.
The enemy fought exceedingly well, especially considering the precariousness of their position.
As dusk fell, the Union men began to break. They scrambled and fell down the bluff. Struggling soldiers quickly swamped the one or two boats on hand, floundering in the swift current.
The horrible spectacle made me shudder. I was willing to fight them to death's door in the open field and to ask no favors, taking the same chances for life as they had, but I had no heart for their ruthless slaughter. All the woman in me revolted at the fiendish delight which some of our soldiers displayed at the sight of the terrible agony endured by those who had but a short time before been contesting the field with them so valiantly.
It had soured Loretta's dream of becoming the next Joan of Arc.
Like myself, who had a talent for assuming disguises, was possessed of courage, resolution, and energy, had it in her power to perform many services of the most vital importance, which would be impossible for a man to even attempt.
Thus began Loretta Velasquez's career as a spy. First, she maneuvered herself into Washington society, finding herself face to face once with President Lincoln.
I did not have an opportunity to exchange a great many words with Mr. Lincoln, but my interview, brief as it was, induced me to believe not only that he was not a bad man, but that he was an honest and well-meaning one.
Loretta worked in the train service for 3 weeks. Then she was back in the fighting ranks. She arrived at her post at Fort Donelson just before it came under siege. Although Loretta was among the escaping Confederate soldiers, her morale had been damaged and her health was suffering. She found her way to the Army of East Tennessee, who was about to launch an assault on Grant's army at Pittsburgh Landing. She joined the Arkansas Grays, the regiment she had helped form, which was now under the command of Thomas C. DeKalb.
Captain DeKalb and I were under an engagement of marriage. I had his letters in my breast pocket and his photograph in the lining of my coat.
Not long into the battle, the second lieutenant fell. Loretta took his place immediately and led the same men she had fought with many months before, and alongside her unknowing close friend. The intense fighting lasted 2 days. On the evening between them, Loretta had a chance to shoot at Grant.
My heart began to beat violently when I saw Grant, and my hand instinctively grasped my revolver. Both he and the officer with him were completely at my mercy. I did even go so far as to take a good aim, and in a second more, had I been a little firmer nerved, the great federal general and the future president of the United States would have finished his career. It was too much like murder, however.
The second day was a defeat for the Confederates. As they stumbled back to Corinth, Loretta found herself separated from her unit. Then a cannon blast crippled her arm.
My fortitude began to give way before the terrible physical suffering I was compelled to endure. All my manliness oozed out before I reached camp.
DeKalb is sick and in a hospital in Atlanta when Loretta goes to visit him as Lieutenant Buford. As they're talking in conversation, Loretta talks how she yearns to expose her identity to DeKalb.
He stopped and took the letter he referred to out of a package, evidently made up of my epistles, and read it to me. He also showed me a picture of myself, which he produced from some hiding place in his pocket, and handed it to me, saying, "That is the woman I love. What do you think of her?" This was almost too much for me, and all trembling with emotion, I handed it back to him, saying, "She is a fine-looking woman."
At that point, Loretta decides it's time. And she said she takes the photograph from his pocket and says, "Don't you think that this image looks a lot like somebody that you've seen?" He said he looked at the image and looked at her and basically said, "No." And at that point, he must have thought about it and did a double take and said, "Oh my goodness," in so many words, "Loretta, is that really you?" And she apologized and hoped that what she had done wouldn't offend him and that maybe he would love her less for disguising as a man and fighting, and he said that it only made him love her more.
Now that they were to get married, DeKalb wished her to shed the uniform and create a home that he would return to. Loretta hesitantly accepted, and they were married at the hospital.
In about a week, he thought himself well enough to report for duty, and he insisted upon going, notwithstanding my entreaties for him to remain until his health was more robust.
On his way back to his army, Captain DeKalb was captured, and he died of illness in a federal prison camp.